Welcome to Vigilant News for January 3rd, 2022. My name is Justin, founder of Stillness in the Storm, and I'm joined by my co-host Ryan Delarme, founder of Underground Newswire. Ryan, how's it going?
It's all right. My tongue kind of hurts. I bit it really hard and now it's affecting my speech.
Always good fun.
Yeah.
Well, don't tongue it too bad then. As usual, you can find the links for the articles we're going to be covering today, and we are covering quite a few interesting ones. We've got sad news. New York Times editor has died. The Dutch police use attack dogs on anti-lockdown protesters. The feds finally admit to running secretive DOJ Commandos at January 6th event last year. We have the powerful Pfizer video that got mRNA vaccine inventor Dr. Malone kicked off Twitter. Children truly need protection from conversion therapy, turning them into transgender. That one's a pretty controversial one. And I have, as a subsidiary link to that, a doctor that I've recently found the research for about how to prevent homosexuality, which is also extremely controversial. And we have Dr. Gottlieb gives a confession that cloth masks do nothing when it comes to viruses.
And that guy actually was one of the commissioners of the FDA.
That's right. Yes, you mentioned that. So yeah, we got a bunch of stuff for you. Before we get started, don't forget to check the links in the description. We just created our new Vigilant News Telegram channel. More stuff going to be posting out through there. So don't forget to subscribe and sign up for that to get all the latest updates. We also have stillnessinthestorm.com/donate to support our work. One-time donations there, or Subscribestar, where you can become a member. So with that, let's go ahead and get into our first article for today, which is the New York Times editor.
So yeah, sad news. New York Times editor dies of a heart attack hours after posting selfie taking COVID booster. Go figure. So yeah, first bit of news, rather sad. I will admit I'm not the biggest fan of the New York Times as an organization, but I acknowledge that it employs human beings, much like myself, who are writing about and doing what they believe is the right thing, albeit based on in their situation on a lack of transparency, which is pretty much partly responsible for this death. So let's get into it. On December 16th in Seoul, South Korea, Carlos Tejada, I believe is pronounced, received the Moderna mRNA LNP booster. And then later that night, he died of a heart attack. Tejada was the deputy Asia director or editor of the New York Times Asia desk, who helped shape coverage of the global COVID-19 crisis in 2021 that won a Pulitzer Prize. So interesting. I didn't know that he was, very sad. Earlier this month, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention released new data showing a total of 965,000 reports of adverse events following COVID vaccines submitted between December 2020 and December 2021 to the VAERS reporting system. Most recent stats included a total of 20,000 reports of deaths and 159,000 reports of serious injuries, including deaths, during the same time period. As we reported earlier this month, a study by researchers at Columbia University suggests that the number is a massive undercount. Given the factor of 20 found by the researchers in this study, according to the most recent VAERS numbers, that would mean that 400,000 deaths possibly attributed to the COVID jab. So this guy, unfortunately, his wife took to Twitter and, gave a message. It was pretty sad. I mean, ideologically, we're on two different ends of like this culture war, but it's like never a good thing to see, a fellow journalist die doing what they think is right.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's kind of a cheap shot to take when somebody that you disagree with their opinion or is even doing something criminal or, nefarious, you just revel in their suffering and their death.
Schadenfreude.
Exactly, Schadenfreude. So yeah, it's sad, definitely sad to see this. There's a lot of victims out there, people who've been misled by supposed authorities like Fauci. And, this is unfortunately, we could argue, one of the victims of this. So definitely sad. Our thoughts and prayers definitely go out to the family here. Let's go ahead and get into our next story. I'll jump in the center stage here, and then I'll kick it back to you, Ryan. Let's talk about this powerful Pfizer video. So if you haven't already seen it, the Joe Rogan with Dr. Malone, which I want to say was, what was that, Friday, Saturday, something like that?
Yeah, it was last week sometime. It was amazing. It was
Yeah.
pretty incredible for a Joe Rogan podcast, I would say.
It was. I was actually, quite impressed by Joe Rogan's knowledge of the situation. Dr. Malone, when he started telling his background and the people he was connected with, I was like, oh, who's this guy? Because apparently he's pretty buddy-buddy with some of the interesting actors, we'll say, like Fauci. But when you actually start hearing him talk about the information and the data, not only is he extremely well-versed in all of the data that I've been aware of. There's a lot of information that is sanitized from the narrative, but he seems to have access to quite a lot of it. One of those factoids, and I'm still in the process of trying to find this, is that apparently if you have natural immunity, then the likelihood you're going to experience an adverse event after vaccination is increased. To what extent, I'm not exactly sure. So that's quite interesting.
Wait, so just so I get this right, if you have natural immunity, it increases your chance of having an adverse reaction?
Precisely.
Wow.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah. Which, yeah, there's a whole lot we could talk about there, but I'll just keep moving because I know there's a lot we want to cover today. So I'm just going to show you guys a little bit of this video. There's, again, if you want to see the links for this, you could just go to the show notes. They're right in there. I'm going to play a little bit of this Pfizer video just to give you a taste of what kind of information is in this Pfizer video, mind you. This is a video from Pfizer, as far as I understand it.
The Pfizer inoculations for COVID-19 and why they do more harm than good. We're the Canadian COVID Care Alliance.
Not Pfizer.
Our alliance of over 500 independent Canadian doctors, scientists, and healthcare practitioners is committed to providing quality, balanced, evidence-based information to the Canadian public about COVID-19 so that hospitalizations can be reduced, lives saved, and our country safely restored to normal as quickly as possible.
So there you go. It was the Canadian Coalition for Vaccine Advisory, Canadian COVID Care Alliance.org. Those are the folks who produce this video. Let me just skip to a little bit of some of the meat and potatoes for this here. They cover a lot. First of all, there's the hierarchy of evidence. So how do you actually organize data and evidence? This is really important because in our current society that relies heavily on expert opinion, the mere presence of a study that has been peer reviewed in a lot of people's minds is unquestionable, rock solid gospel, basically. That is not the case at all. Just because a study has been done by peer review does not mean it's even trustworthy. Apparently, according to the editor of the Lancet, 50% of studies that get submitted to the Lancet can't even be reproduced. So, yeah.
Also, the SAGE, the modeling group that's used by the government to create models that show that lockdowns are effective, they have tons of whistleblowers coming forward saying that they kind of fixed the how they were doing the modeling to create a certain outcome. So it's all kinds of like shenanigans going on.
Precisely. Yeah, the shenanigans are endemic. This is one of the reasons, me and Ryan are so into proper fact checking and epistemology, because how to organize this information is critical. And if you don't know how to sort this kind of information and see the different layers, which this video that we're looking at right now is going to go into to a certain extent, you're going to be easily deceived. So this is a fantastic video. I've only been able to glimpse like a few minutes of it. And let me just play this little bit of a section here, just to give you guys a little taste.
Level of evidence available, which is level 1. So first, we're going to talk about Pfizer's original trial report that came out in December 31st of 2020. It was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and it showed 2 months worth of safety and efficacy data. It described how the trial started with over 43,000 people divided into a treatment group and a control group, and how for 2 months, they followed them to see who developed COVID-19. The report claimed that the inoculations were safe and showed 95% efficacy 7 days after the second dose. But that 95% was actually relative risk reduction. Absolute risk reduction was only 0.84%. Many people don't know the difference between relative and absolute risk reduction, so we're just going to show you what that means. Pfizer reported that its vaccine shows a 95% efficacy. That sounds like it protects you 95% of the time, right? But that's not actually what that number means. That 95% refers to the relative risk reduction, but it doesn't tell you how much your overall risk is reduced by vaccination. For that, we need absolute risk reduction. In the Pfizer trial, 8 out of 18,198 people who were given the vaccine developed COVID-19. In the unvaccinated placebo group, 162 people got it, which means that even without the vaccine, the risk of contracting COVID-19 was extremely low at 0.88%, which the vaccine then reduced to 0.04%. So the net benefit, or the absolute risk reduction that you're being offered with a Pfizer vaccine, is 0.84%. That 95% number, that refers to the relative difference between 0.88 and 0.04%.
Wow.
Wow, wow, wow.
See, it's all about how you present it.
Exactly. It's all about how you present the data. I mean, man, I could just rant for hours about this, but one last thing I'll say is that our reality is based on information. If you don't know how to decode the information, then you're not going to be properly informed. It's that simple. And a lot of science, because of the influence of the Rockefellers and various other people, Cecil B. DeRhodes, who created the roundtables back in the turn of the 20th century, all sorts of people, they essentially hijacked the mechanism by which the people were taught how to decode data. That's one of the reasons why critical thinking, I would argue, was stripped away from the modern education system, because they don't want you to know how to decode the data yourself. So,
and also you had Carnegie and Rockefeller coming together at the beginning of the 1900s to basically weed out all other forms of approach of medicine towards medicine that isn't drug related. Mm-hmm. Since they owned the chemical companies that were used to create the drugs, they got rid of natural homeopathy, aromatherapy, herbalists, naturopaths, etc. All pretty much wiped out when they were the leading like medical people back then, and the AMA was like barely holding on. And then it just completely flipped around after that.
Yeah, if memory serves, actually, you're spot on, Ryan. The efficacy, so how effective were the treatments? If you're looking at naturopathy, allopathic medicine, which is what primarily we use in hospitals today, the efficacy was reduced for the mainstream medicine that we have today in comparison to these other natural treatments. I'll cite as one last little tidbit, the 1946 testimony that Dr. Max Gerson brought forward when he went to Congress. And if you read the transcripts there, it's quite revealing. We'll put it that way. I got to be careful what I say on YouTube. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to one of yours, Ryan. Which one do you want to cover next?
I got a pretty shocking couple clips to show you guys and an article to go over briefly. But before I do that, I would like to make a suggestion. If you're interested in watching that Dr. Malone interview with Joe Rogan, also check out the Peter McCullough interview, because they together they really just like destroy any argument that anybody could ever have in favor of lockdowns, vaccination, and face masks, etc. But the combo of those two videos will really just annihilate like that whole narrative. So
precisely. Good point.
Anyway, let's get on to something equally as traumatizing. We have reports of Dutch police using attack dogs against anti-lockdown protesters. So amid the Omicron variant spread, and despite an emerging consensus that this latest variant is not very severe in terms of individual impact and hospitalizations, lockdowns are returning to much of Europe, and so are fierce protests. So we have some clips of how some people in the Netherlands were treated doing their anti-lockdown protests. And remember, this is all for your safety.
Yeah, this is a pretty brutal one right here, if I remember correctly. Yeah, no kidding. Oh my God. Yeah, I've never been bit by a dog like that, but you know, what's happening there, it looks like, oh, it's not so bad. He's just getting bit on the arm. No, that his arm is pretty badly messed up, I have no doubt.
So this is coming out of Sunday. There was a large anti-restriction protest near the National Museum in Amsterdam. That's where this took place. Mm-hmm. We actually have another clip of the response team and then the actual protesters surrounding them, just to give you I guess a bird's eye view of this whole thing.
Mm-hmm. So we see the cops in the center, right? It's the protesters around.
Seem to be a little outnumbered.
Yeah.
Look at him, just crack that guy. My God.
Wow.
It's for your health.
I'm kidding.
Protecting and serving. Shit out of you.
It's kind of like this mug. Socialism. Ideas so good they have to be mandatory. All right, I think we got one more, right? You wanted to take a look at, or
One more article or
Or-
one more clip? Yeah, any
yeah.
of these clips are pretty telling. I mean,
Okay.
they show you exactly what's going on over there.
let's see, this one's a short one. Look at the size of this crowd. This is a pretty big crowd. Fascinating.
Wow.
All right. Good stuff. Well, I mean, it's encouraging to know that people are willing to go out there and face situations like this.
It's just like they use those dogs, and it's like it's terrifying to see a dog coming at you with them chompers. But also, it's like you're not gonna fight back against a dog. People love dogs, so it's kind of like a double like whammy, you know.
Mhm.
It's like I don't know. It just seems kind of cruel. Like you can't fight back against a dog.
Yeah, exactly. In a lot of such places, apparently, it's if you assault a dog because you're getting attacked, then you could be charged with assault and battery of the dog, a police officer. You know, which comes with hefty
Yeah, consequences. Yeah.
precisely. So let's go ahead and jump to another one here. I'm going to cover this one. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do this one first because this is a pretty good clip. So we've got an article coming out of Becker News. And as usual, if you want to check the show notes, you can see this. We also post everything for 90% of the stuff that we post. We also post on Stillness in the Storm, so you can check that out. And Ryan also posts a lot on Underground Newswire as well. So this is coming out of Becker News. Dr. Scott Gottlieb gives unbelievable confession. Quote, "A cloth mask is not going to protect you from an airborne virus." Now, just for some context, I went to school for physics. I'm fairly familiar with some of the, the scientific principles associated with this. Now, is it possible that a mask can reduce transmissibility? To a certain extent, because a lot of transmissibility comes from aerosolized water particles, so spit and lung fluids, things like this.
But can't you just like put your mask in your face up to a window and breathe through it and see all of the moisture?
Bingo, exactly. It is not a perfect protection by any means. Even an N95 mask has certain limitations. When I was voting for Trump last year, I met a woman who literally developed masks at a scientific level. And she talked to me for almost 45 minutes about the basis of masks and their efficacy. And she said the idea that we can somehow mask against a virus is ludicrous. You would essentially need like a full-blown hazmat suit to completely protect yourself in any appreciable, measurable way. Even the idea of six foot distancing is ridiculous. So
that's what they use at Wuhan, like a whole hazmat suit.
Precisely. So let's go ahead and listen to this guy. And if memory serves, this is the guy that was on the board of the FDA, right? Former FDA chief. Here we
Gottlieb,
are. Yeah. So let's hear what he has to say.
I've been looking at pediatric hospitalizations at this record high and concerned about sending my son back into a preschool, even with a mask on. What do you tell parents? Are cloth masks just not good enough anymore?
Cloth masks aren't going to provide a lot of protection. That's the bottom line. This is an airborne illness. We now understand that. And a cloth mask is not going to protect you from a virus that spreads through airborne transmission. It could protect better through droplet transmission, something like the flu, but not something like this coronavirus. We have to recognize this has not been a benign disease in young children. There's a perception that young children haven't been hit hard to date from coronavirus. That's just not true. We've recorded more than 600 pediatric deaths from COVID over the last 2 years. To put that in perspective, we had 1 death from flu in the pediatric population last year, and so far 2 this year. So over a period of time, we've done a very good job protecting children generally from respiratory infections. We've recorded more than 600 deaths from COVID against 3 deaths from flu. So this is affecting children, and particularly young children. This new strain could have a predilection, again, for the upper airway, which could be a bigger challenge in young kids because of the way that it binds to the airway cells. In terms of going back to school, I think the prerogative clearly is to try to get schools reopened. We shouldn't be doing preemptive school closures, in my opinion, but there will be situations where we have reactive school closures when there are large outbreaks.
Well, there you have it. Now, just for some context here, I think the main point of this article is that he's essentially admitting that masks don't do what we think they do. But he's also pushing the idea that children are dying at a higher rate than the flu. And admittedly, I haven't seen the data myself, so I can't know for sure if that's true or if it's not true. However, I am skeptical because we do know for a fact that there's a financial incentive for people who die to be labeled as COVID deaths. And all it takes is the presence of COVID antibodies in a person who's died in the hospital for it to be labeled a COVID death.
And not to mention the financial incentive. I think it's something like $3,000 per COVID.
That's right.
Diagnosis.
That's what Dr. Malone was saying in the video. So yeah, so does this, you got to take all this in context. What we do know is that masks aren't necessarily all that effective. And what likely the powers that be are going to try to do is, they'll say, hey, look, masks aren't effective. This is why you need to get vaccinated. This is why we need to close school. This is why we need 50-foot distancing instead of 6-foot. Anything that continues to further the agenda is likely what they'll use to spin this kind of thing. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to, let's see, I think this one here, right?
Yeah, this is the one.
All right.
So we've been covering January 6th. It's a pretty popular topic, even a year later. We won't get into too much of the details that have been, gone over many times in the last year. But today we have some breaking news. Feds finally admit to running secretive DOJ commandos at January 6th Trump protests. So the Department of Justice admitted this week to running secretive DOJ commandos on January 6th. 4 Trump supporters died that day, including 2 women who were killed by Capitol Police. A third woman was nearly killed, but was rescued by Green Beret Jeremy Brown. Big ups to Jeremy Brown.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The DOJ commandos were giving shoot to kill orders. Now they're admitting the government did in fact have commandos at the Capitol on the 6th. After nearly a year, this information is finally coming out, and they accused the Gateway Pundit and others of being conspiracy nuts for reporting the feds in the crowd that day, which are now pretty much obvious. You have Ray Epps, this guy who is like basically goading people into going into the Capitol, not getting arrested despite video evidence of him doing that, while other people who weren't involved with the actual breaching of the Capitol still rotting in jail cells a year later. Right. So it's obviously there are protected provocateurs that are still at large out there, Ray Epps being just one of them. You got John Sullivan. I don't even know what's going on with that guy anymore, but that should be, on every major news outlet. Anyway, so this is coming from a Newsweek report that we have linked to, and we just have the whole thing in the article if you want to read it. But yeah, we thought this would be worth mentioning since it seems like this whole, with the January 6th commission and subpoenaing Trump as part of trying to get him not to run, because I think there's some kind of issue with being subpoenaed and then running for president. So
yeah, if memory serves, it's if you're indicted, then you can't serve, which they could try to pull an indictment thing with all this. So
yeah, I hear that's what they were going to try to do.
So yeah, as far as I can tell, it seems like the January 6th narrative continues to crumble. And one really good point to keep in mind is nobody's been charged that's been sitting in jail. So almost a year has gone by since some of these people were taken into custody, and there's no charge.
Another important thing to remember is that 14,000 hours of footage was being withheld by the FBI, because DC, one of the most heavily surveilled areas in our entire country, all of the outdoor surveillance footage has been, pretty much under lock and key since it happened. Mm-hmm. Which nothing suspicious about that.
No, exactly. Full transparency, right? All right. And for our last article, this one, like I said in the beginning, it's kind of controversial, but in a good way, because we are living in a world where essentially mental illness is being pushed onto children. Okay. Now, keep in mind that the transgender, if you're sympathetic with this, I'm not attacking any transgender person. I have no transgender people. I'm friends with them. I have sympathy for all of God's children. Okay. But we have this toxic idea that somehow you can switch genders, which is not true fundamentally. And essentially what's happening is it's conversion therapy. When I saw this article, I'm like, you know what? This hits the nail on the head in so many different ways, and it puts it in a way that is a lot easier to digest, because this idea of converting somebody from being homosexual to straight is often met with derision. You know, people often think it was like kind of Christian cult activity, things like this. And it's often, you know, considered to be socially uncouth and taboo, and to even insinuate that you can do something like that. Yet there's a very, very good reason to believe that there's mental illness with these things.
Yeah, not to mention all the psychological issues that create these things and linger, and they all are attached like a web of trauma and issues inside a person. Like it's all connected, right?
Absolutely, yeah. As a matter of fact, there was a woman, man, I should have brought the book down, but I have a book. I'll probably show it maybe, you know, in the big stream or something like that, the book of the week. But it's a book written by, I want to say it's a New York Times reporter who was interviewed by Jordan Peterson, who wrote a book about the psychological contagion facet associated with transgenderism, that young girls who are gender confused, and the incidence of gender confusion has got up because we have such blurred lines with respect to gender these days. At least this is what a lot of the experts are saying, which I'll tell you about here in a minute. You can go, if you're a young girl, you're gender confused, you go to college and you meet a whole bunch of other gender confused people. And then some of them want to transition. And then you're like, well, maybe I'm not a female. Maybe I'm a man in a woman's body. And then you go to your therapist, you're like, hey, I might be transgender. And they're like, oh, you are? No problem. Let's go ahead and schedule your double mastectomy. Let's get you on these hormone treatments right away. Not even like a second thought necessarily. Now I'm being a little hyperbolic, but essentially this is what this New York Times reporter discovered. So it's the level of psychological disturbance that was openly being pushed to children is endemic. And I think the time is for us to take a stand. And this is why I think a lot of parents are taking a stand with this. So I'm not necessarily going to get into this as a long, extensive article, but
it does sound pretty transphobic, and I am going to choose to be offended by it.
Yeah, I'm sorry for misgendering you, Ryan. You know, I wanted to, as a supplement to this idea that we essentially have a factory for producing gender confused people, I wanted to cite the work of a man. This article is actually written by D. O'Leary, but there's another man by the name of Dr. Nicolesi. He put together a book called Preventing Homosexuality. And he's a child development psychologist. He's done a lot of different studies, and it appears, and this is something I'm actively researching, so I'll have more to report on this, that one of the important facets of establishing what we now call cisgender, or essentially that you are born a boy and you identify as a boy and are heterosexual, or you are born a girl and you identify as a girl and are heterosexual, that requires proper role models in society. And if you don't have proper role models in society, then also proper role modeling and differentiation within the family unit, then that often can lead to gender confusion and homosexuality. Now, this is obviously extremely controversial because the idea that homosexuality and transgenderism might be an illness that we can solve is something that offends a lot of people. But the data, you know, the truth is the truth. I'm not necessarily making any bold claims right now. I'm just telling you that some people have a good case to make for the fact that this might be the case. And as I continue to boil down on this, I will report what I find. So you can check the links in the description for all of that information and do your own research, and we'd love to hear back from you.
I would like everyone to know that I identify as a strong, independent Black woman, and that if you say otherwise, then you're insensitive and inclusive to me.
Exactly. Excuse me, Ryan. I'm so sorry.
You're forgiven this.
What are your pronouns exactly?
Were, because the government's going to kill me with their vaccine boosters.
Yeah, I identify as an unvaccinated person. So we'll just put it that way, I suppose. Although I am vaccinated. No, I identify as a vaccinated person when I'm going into a restaurant or flying on an airplane. That's the way I identify.
That's brave and stunning.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for watching, everybody. Don't forget to check the description. We got a new Vigilant News Telegram channel. So we'll be posting stuff in there. Also, thank you for your support. Thank you for liking, sharing, and subscribing. And with that, we'll see you next time. Take care.